I was in the middle of a 12-hour shift when my phone buzzed in my scrubs pocket. I almost let it go to voicemail. We had a full floor that night. 3 kids post-op, 1 transfer from the ICU, and a family in the waiting room who hadn't slept in 2 days. But the name on the screen stopped me cold. It was my grandfather's attorney. I ducked into the supply closet at the end of the hall, the one that smells like latex gloves and floor cleaner, and answered on the second ring. He said he was sorry for my loss. My grandfather had passed 4 days ago, quietly, in his sleep, the way he always said he wanted to go. Then the attorney said something that made me press my back flat against the shelf behind me. My grandfather had left me everything. His house on the lake in rural Georgia, his investment accounts, his real estate holdings that I hadn't even known existed. The total came to just over $5 million. I made him repeat it. He did. I stood in that supply closet for a full 3 minutes after we hung up, listening to the muffled sounds of the ward on the other side of the door. $5 million. My grandfather had grown up with nothing. He'd built a small lumber company from scratch, sold it at the right time, and invested quietly for decades without ever making a show of it. He drove the same truck for 15 years. He had the same phone plan I remembered from middle school. He had never once mentioned anything close to that number. The first thing I felt was grief. The same grief I'd been pushing through since the funeral. The second thing I felt was fear, because before I could think about what to do with any of it, I thought about my brother. My brother and I stopped being close a long time ago. We grew up together in that same house on the lake during summers, swimming off the dock, fishing with our grandfather while our mother worked double shifts an hour away. We were tight as kids. Then his late 20s happened. A string of failed business ventures, borrowed money that never came back, and eventually a marriage to a woman who had ambition for both of them and ethics for neither. By the time my grandfather passed, my brother and I hadn't spoken in almost 2 years. The last real conversation we had ended with him calling me selfish for not co-signing a loan he wanted for a restaurant that everyone who knew him could see was going to fail. I said no. He said things that were hard to unhear. And that was that. I asked the attorney to keep the contents of the will private until I'd had a chance to review the documents in person. He agreed, told me he could meet at the end of the week, and reminded me gently that the estate would transfer fully once I signed. I went back to my patients. I didn't sleep well for the next 3 nights. The meeting with the attorney was on a Friday morning. His office was downtown, the kind of place with dark wood and diplomas in matching frames. He walked me through everything methodically: the lake house deed, the account transfers, the real estate portfolio, which turned out to be 2 rental properties in the county that my grandfather had owned outright since the 90s. It was airtight, the attorney said. My grandfather had updated the documents 2 years ago, not long after the falling out with my brother. He'd been thorough about it. No ambiguity, no loopholes, no joint clauses. I left with a folder and a feeling I couldn't quite name. Something between gratitude and the quiet dread of knowing what was coming next. My brother found out before the week was over. I don't know who told him. It might have been a cousin, might have been someone at the county clerk's office who knew the family. It might have been my mother, who I'd made the mistake of calling after the attorney meeting, thinking I could trust her with the news before my brother did. She'd gone quiet on the phone in a way that told me she was already calculating. By Sunday night, my brother had left me 2 voicemails I didn't return, 3 texts I read and set face down, and had apparently driven past my apartment building because my neighbor mentioned seeing a truck matching his in the parking lot. I changed my sleep schedule that week without meaning to. I'd come home from the hospital, sit at my kitchen table with a cup of tea I didn't drink, and run through the same math. He was going to come at me. I just didn't know the angle yet. I was driving back from the lake house on a Tuesday afternoon when it happened. I'd gone out there to do a walkthrough, check what needed updating, and meet a locksmith to get the exterior doors rekeyed. The drive back was easy, the kind of 2-lane road that goes through farmland and pine trees with almost no traffic. I was thinking about the dock, about whether the wood needed replacing, about a summer I was 7 years old and my grandfather taught me to bait a hook. I wasn't watching the intersection as carefully as I should have been. Neither was the driver of the pickup that ran the stop sign on my left. The hit spun my car sideways. I remember the sound first, then the airbag, then the odd stillness that follows impact when your brain hasn't caught up to your body yet. I sat there for a moment with both hands still on the wheel, tasting blood where I'd bitten the inside of my cheek, The windshield cracked in a long diagonal across my field of vision. A woman appeared at my window almost immediately. She'd seen it happen from her driveway. She asked if I could move my hands. I could. She called 911 while I sat there trying to remember exactly where I'd been in my thoughts 30 seconds before everything changed. The ambulance came. The paramedic asked who to call, and I gave him the name of my friend and coworker Dana, who I knew would come without asking too many questions, and without calling anyone I didn't want called. He asked me to confirm my address, my date of birth, whether I was on any medications. I answered everything and watched the tree line through the back doors as they loaded me in. 2 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, a deep bruise along my left side from the seatbelt that would take weeks to fade. I was admitted for observation, and by that evening I was lying in a hospital bed with the lights low, thinking that the universe had a strange sense of timing. Dana arrived within an hour. She brought a bag with clean clothes, my phone charger, and a coffee she'd gotten from the good place 2 blocks from the hospital, not the cafeteria. She sat in the chair beside the bed and didn't make me talk until I was ready. When I told her about the inheritance, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "And your brother doesn't know you're here yet?" He did by the next morning. He showed up at the hospital with his wife, both of them dressed like they were coming from church, which told me immediately that this was a performance. His wife had a small bouquet of flowers that she set on the windowsill without asking where I'd like them. My brother stood at the foot of the bed with an expression he probably practiced in the car on the way over, somewhere between concerned and wounded. "I heard about the accident," he said. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know," I said. His wife pulled her chair close to the bed, which I hadn't invited her to do. She leaned in with a soft voice and said they'd been worried about me since the will reading, that they thought the whole situation was a lot to carry alone, and that families should be looking out for each other during a time like this. I watched her hands while she talked. She kept them folded in her lap, which was the stillest I'd ever seen them. "I have good support," I said. My brother looked at Dana, who looked back at him with an expression that gave him nothing. He tried a different angle. He talked about the lake house, about summers we'd spent there as kids, about what it would mean to keep it in the family properly. He said the word "we" 6 times in 4 minutes. I counted. Then his wife said something about how managing a property portfolio was a lot of responsibility, and that they'd actually been researching property management options locally, and that if I wanted, they had some contacts who could help. "I have an attorney," I said. "He's handling the estate." My brother's smile stayed in place, but something behind it shifted. He said, "Of course, that made sense, that they just wanted me to know they were there if I needed anything." His wife nodded with her whole body. After they left, Dana looked at the flowers on the windowsill. "You want me to throw those away?" "Leave them," I said. "I want to remember what this felt like." The doctor discharged me 3 days later with a list of restrictions I was only partially going to follow and a prescription I actually would. Dana drove me home, helped me get settled, and stayed until I'd eaten something and proven I could navigate my own apartment without bracing against the furniture. That night, I called the attorney. I told him to move forward on the transfers, lock down the accounts, and make sure my brother's name appeared nowhere on any document connected to the estate. He confirmed what I already knew, that the will was clean, and my brother had no legal standing. But he also warned me, in the careful language attorneys use when they're telling you something without telling you directly, that people with no legal standing sometimes found creative ways to become problems anyway. I asked him what he meant. He said to watch for joint account applications filed in error, property liens based on false claims of debt, and challenges to my grandfather's mental competency at the time the will was updated. I wrote all 3 down. My brother called twice that week. I let both go to voicemail. His messages were warm the first time, measured the second, with just a hint of something tighter underneath the words. His wife texted me separately. She said they'd been looking at the rental properties in the county and thought there might be some deferred maintenance worth addressing, and that her cousin was a contractor if I needed someone I could trust. I didn't respond. Dana came over on a Thursday evening and we sat at my kitchen table going through everything I'd gathered since the hospital. My brother's wife had a social media profile that was more revealing than she probably realized. She'd posted a photo from the week after my grandfather's funeral, standing in front of a commercial real estate office in town. The caption said something about exciting opportunities in the works. It had been posted the same day I was meeting with the attorney. She'd known before most of the family. Dana tapped the screen. She's been moving since before you even knew the number. That reframed things. My brother wasn't acting on impulse or grief. This had been planned, at least on her end, which meant the warm hospital visit, the gentle offer about property management, the contractor cousin. All of it had been coordinated before they walked through that door. I started keeping a log, dates, messages, anything that went through my phone or my email. The attorney had already advised me to do this, but now I was doing it with more focus. Every contact from my brother or his wife got documented with a timestamp and the exact wording. I also started paying attention to who in my wider family had been in contact with them recently. The answer was more people than I'd expected. My mother called on a Saturday. She opened with how she'd heard I was doing better and was glad the injuries weren't worse. Then she asked if I'd thought about what I was going to do with the lake house. Because it was a big property, and maybe it made sense to have family involved in the upkeep. I asked her what she meant by involved. She said my brother had mentioned a partnership arrangement, something structured, where everyone could benefit from the estate and help maintain it at the same time. Mom, I said, keeping my voice even. He has no part of the estate. He never did. She got quiet the way she always got quiet when she didn't want to take a side. She said she wasn't taking sides. She was just passing along what she'd heard, and that she thought it would be a shame for the family to fracture over money. I told her the fracture wasn't over money. The fracture had existed for years, and the money had just made it visible. She said that was a hard thing to hear. I said I knew it was, and I meant it. I wasn't angry at her. I was just done pretending the cracks weren't there. After we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a while. The lamp in the corner was on. And the apartment was quiet in the way that only feels lonely when you've just gotten off a call that reminded you how alone you already were in certain parts of your life. Then I picked up the phone again and called the attorney. I asked him what it would take to formalize the no-contact provisions around the property. He walked me through it. A trespass order for the lake house. A written notice to my brother and his wife that all communication regarding the estate must go through legal representation. Cease and desist language around any representation of themselves as connected to my affairs. I told him to draft all three. The documents went out by certified mail. My brother signed for his 3 days later. His wife signed for hers the same afternoon. He called me within the hour. I didn't pick up. His voicemail lasted 4 minutes. The first minute was calm. The second minute was hurt. The third minute was something else. A kind of rehearsed anger. The kind that sounds like emotion but has a script underneath it. He said I was making enemies out of family. He said our grandfather would be disappointed in how I was handling this. He said I'd changed. The fourth minute was his wife's voice in the background, low but clear enough to hear, coaching him on what to say next. I saved the voicemail as a file and added it to the log. Dana came over the next day with her laptop and a bottle of wine she set on the counter, and neither of us opened. We spent the afternoon going through property records, business filings, anything publicly available that connected my brother's name or his wife's name to activity in the county. What we found was interesting. His wife had filed paperwork for an LLC 2 months before my grandfather passed. The company name was vague, something about Property Solutions. The registered address was a mailbox service downtown. She'd listed herself as the sole officer, but the phone number on the filing was one I recognized as my brother's. Dana leaned back in her chair. She was setting this up before he died. I looked at the date on the filing again. 2 months before. She might have known he was sick, I said. He'd been declining for a while. People in town knew. We kept digging. The LLC had applied for a business license with the county that included property management services. The application listed a reference, a local commercial landlord I'd never heard of, and described prior experience that we couldn't find any record of anywhere. The license was still pending. I called the attorney that evening. I walked him through everything we'd found. He was quiet for a moment, then asked me to send him the filing documents. We can challenge the license application, he said. The misrepresented credentials alone may be enough to flag it for review. I sent everything he asked for. 2 days later, he submitted a formal objection to the licensing board. It was precise, factual, and completely impersonal. No anger, no family history, just inconsistencies, documented and cited. The same week, I drove out to the lake house for the first time since the accident. The drive felt different now. Longer, or maybe I was just paying attention to different things. The property looked exactly as I remembered from childhood. The dock at the end of the yard, the screened porch across the back, the way the tree line around the water made the whole place feel private in a way that nothing in the city ever did. I walked every room. I sat on the porch for a while and watched the water and thought about my grandfather sitting in that same spot for 30 years, building something quietly, making sure there was something left to pass on. I made a mental list of what needed to be done. The roof would need inspection before winter. The dock boards were soft in 2 spots near the far end. The window frames in the back bedroom needed resealing. None of it was urgent, but all of it was mine to handle now, and that felt important to accept. I called a locksmith before I left and had every entry point rekeyed on the spot. On the drive back, my phone showed a missed call from a number I didn't recognize. I checked the voicemail when I got home. It was a man who introduced himself as a real estate investor, said he'd heard the lake property might be available for private sale or lease, and that he'd been connected to my family. I called the attorney. "Did you authorize anyone to contact potential buyers about the lake house?" I asked. He had not. I forwarded the voicemail. Within 48 hours, the attorney had traced the referral back to my brother's wife through a mutual contact she'd apparently used as a buffer. She'd been quietly floating the property on the informal market, presenting herself as a representative of the estate, before the estate had even fully transferred to me. That was the moment the situation stopped feeling like a family dispute and started feeling like something I needed to document for a different reason entirely. I asked the attorney whether what she'd done constituted fraud. He said the word he would use was misrepresentation, and that depending on whether any financial transactions had followed, it could be considerably more serious. No money had changed hands. I'd been fast enough, but the pattern was clear. Every move she'd made, the LLC before my grandfather died, the contractor offer at the hospital, the real estate investor referral, had been aimed at positioning herself to profit from an estate she had no claim to. And my brother had either been complicit in all of it or had been carried along, which depending on the day I couldn't decide was better or worse. I spent a weekend building out a complete timeline. Every contact, every filing, every voicemail. Dana helped me organize it by category: financial, legal, personal. By the time we finished, it was 11 pages long. I sat with it for a while before I sent it to the attorney. Dana looked at the stack of papers on my kitchen table. "That's more than enough for a restraining order." "I know," I said. I wasn't ready to file for one yet, but I wanted to be ready when I was. My brother made his next move on a Wednesday. He didn't call. He showed up at my apartment building and buzzed from the entrance. I watched the intercom camera for a moment before I answered. He was alone. No wife. That was different enough to make me curious. I let him into the lobby but not upstairs. I came down and met him in the entrance hallway, which has 2 exits and a security camera above the door. He looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. He said he wanted to talk without her involved. That surprised me. He sat down on the bench near the mailboxes and rubbed the back of his neck, which was something he used to do as a kid when he was embarrassed about something. "She's gotten ahead of herself," he said. I didn't answer. I waited. "The LLC, the investor calls. I didn't know all of it," he said. "Not the specifics." "Did you know any of it?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Which was an answer. "I knew she thought there was an opportunity," he said. "I didn't know she was using your name." I looked at him for a long moment. He was my brother. I knew the difference between his lying face and his ashamed face. And right now I was looking at the second one. "She used your name too," I said. "She registered an LLC with your phone number." He looked at the floor. "That makes you a part of it whether you knew the details or not," I said. "Legally and otherwise." He said he understood. He said he was going to step back. He said he was sorry, and the apology had a different quality to it than the voicemail had, less performance, more resignation. I told him I wasn't in a position to take him at his word. I told him that everything his wife had done was documented, and that if anything else came through connected to either of them, I would let the attorney do what attorneys do. He nodded. He didn't argue. He left, and I stood in the lobby for a while after the door closed behind him, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, Just the particular sadness of watching something you'd hoped might still be fixable finish the process of breaking. The licensing board denied his wife's application 2 weeks later. The letter cited misrepresentation of professional credentials and incomplete disclosure of business relationships. The attorney called me when he saw the confirmation. He said it was a clean denial, on record, and that it would complicate any future applications she tried to file in the county. I thanked him. He reminded me that the cease and desist was holding. The trespass order was logged with the county sheriff's office, and all accounts had fully transferred. From a legal standpoint, he said, my position was solid. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and let myself be still for a few minutes. The apartment was quiet. Afternoon light came through the window at an angle that made the room feel warmer than the temperature warranted. I thought about my grandfather. He'd been careful with everything he built, careful about who he trusted, careful about what he said, careful about how he moved through the world without making a production of it. He'd passed all of that on through the will. Not just the money, but the intention behind it. He knew I'd need to fight for it. He'd made sure I was the one holding the documents when the fight started. I pulled out my notebook and opened to a fresh page. I'd spent so much of the past weeks on defense that I hadn't let myself think about what came after. The lake house needed work. The rental properties needed a real property manager, not a family member with an LLC and a contractor cousin. My nursing schedule had been stretched thin while I managed everything else, and I needed to be honest with myself about that. Dana came over that evening, and we sat on the back steps of my building with takeout boxes between us, talking about things that had nothing to do with my brother or his wife or the estate. She asked about the lake house, not strategically, just with genuine curiosity. She'd heard me talk about summers there my whole life. I told her I wanted to repair the dock first. That felt like the right place to start. She said that made sense. My mother called the following week. This time, she didn't mention my brother. She asked how I was healing from the accident, whether the ribs were still bothering me, whether I was back to full shifts at work. It was the kind of call she used to make before all of this, checking in, just checking in. I told her I was doing better. I told her the estate was settled and the legal stuff had cleared. She said she was glad to hear it. Then she said, quietly, that she thought my grandfather had made the right choice. That was not what I expected from her. I asked her what she meant. She said she'd watched how I handled everything, the accident, the pressure, the documents, all of it. She said she'd watched my brother's wife operate over the past year and had her own thoughts about it that she'd kept to herself too long. She said my grandfather had known who would take care of what he'd built, and he'd been right. It wasn't a full-throated apology. She didn't acknowledge the phone call where she'd passed along the partnership idea or the weeks of silence while everything was playing out. But it was something. It was her finding the edge of the line she'd been standing behind and stepping over it, even just slightly. I told her thank you. I meant it. The security system at the lake house was installed on a Friday morning in late fall. The installer walked me through the camera placement, the door sensors, the remote access from my phone. He was professional and quick and didn't make conversation I didn't invite. When he left, I walked the property one more time. The dock had been repaired. I'd hired a local contractor, not a cousin, just someone with a good reputation who'd worked on houses along the lake for 20 years. He'd replaced the soft boards, reinforced the posts, and added a small bench at the end that I hadn't asked for but immediately liked. I stood on it for a while. The water was still. The afternoon was overcast in a way that made the colors deeper than usual, the pine trees darker, the surface of the lake silver instead of blue. Somewhere across the water, a bird called once and went quiet. My brother's wife had withdrawn the LLC. The attorney had mentioned it in an update call, almost as a footnote. The entity had been dissolved, the registration canceled, no explanation in the filing. She'd just quietly shut it down. My brother hadn't made contact again since the lobby. His wife hadn't tried any new angles that I could find. The license was denied. The property was secured. The accounts were locked. On paper, it was over. What it actually was a long education in something I probably should have understood sooner, that the people who want access to what you've built almost never announce themselves clearly. They arrive with flowers and soft voices and offers to help. They use the word family the way a key uses a lock, testing different pressure points until something gives, And the only way to hold your ground against that isn't to become harder or colder. It's to become clearer about who you are, what you're protecting, and why it matters. My grandfather had understood that his whole life. He'd built everything he had without making noise about it, without asking for recognition, without let other people's definitions of success become his. He'd passed on not just the money but the model. Quiet, deliberate, unshakable. I locked the lake house and walked back to my car. The drive home was easy, the same Pine Line 2-lane road, late afternoon sun cutting through the trees at intervals. I had a full shift in the morning, 2 new patients on the floor, a follow-up appointment for my ribs at the end of the week. There were things to do, schedules to keep, a dock with a new bench I intended to sit on more often. The ground underneath everything felt solid. Not because nothing bad could happen, but because I knew now what I was standing on. My grandfather's work. My own. I kept both hands on the wheel and watched the road, and I didn't look over my shoulder once.